Hi, it's lovely to be back again with you for another session. Today I'm going to be covering something a little bit more personal and close to home. We looked a little bit at working with myths, legends, folktales that already existed before. Today we're going to be writing from our own personal mythology. I'm going to take you through what to do if you want to take a story from your own life, your own family, your own community, and turn it into something that feels well rounded and actually like a story you might read or pass on to someone else. Before we do that, I said I'd bring you 5 more tips for people who are trying to get started with writing. My first one's a really fun one. It is get nosy. When you're a writer, you have full license to be as nosy as you want to be. Whenever you're out, listen to other people's conversations, watch people really intently, be aware of what's going on around you. That's where stories come from. So if anybody asks you what you're doing, if you're staring at them or listening in Tesco's or whatever, you can say, I'm a writer, totally allowed. Second thing, keep a notebook on you at all time. Notebook or your phone or whatever you like to take notes on. You never know when you're going to be struck with a moment of inspiration, and it's really easy to lose that. So I carry my phone with me all the time, and it's full in the notes section of just little observations and lines and ideas and things I jot down that I can come back to later on. If you don't write them down, you'll think you'll remember them and you just won't. So keep a notebook with you. Third thing is develop your own voice. When you start out writing, it's really easy to think, gosh, I'd really like to write like Hemingway, or I would like to write like Seamus Heaney, or Edna O'Brien, or Angela Carter, whoever you really love. You read a lot of their work and you try and copy them. As you go on, you'll start to find that you've got your own voice. Have confidence in that. I always say that you are the only person that can write your story. And that's really liberating. Don't compare yourself to other writers. You're the only one that can write exactly the way you can, and be confident in that. Grow into your voice and enjoy it. 4, this is one of my big tips I've learned over the last couple of years. Carry your characters in your head until they feel real to you. Last session we talked a little bit about making believable characters. One of the things that you do is you carry them up here. So when I'm writing a novel, I might have my characters in my head, thinking about them for 6 months. For a short story, it could be a few weeks, but I'm kind of having a little internal dialogue with them, getting to know them, and I don't start to write until they actually feel like a real person, somebody that I could commit to paper and they'd be believable. 5th thing, I've noted down here, push the devil off your shoulder. I don't know what your devil looks like. It could be your mother-in-law. It could be that English teacher that you had years ago who told you didn't know how to write. It could be the expectation of your friends. You aren't writing for them. You're writing for yourself. So whoever that person who's on your shoulder is, who you think, gosh, if this person reads this, I'd be absolutely mortified. Get rid of them now. You'll never get to the good stuff if you can't get the devil off your shoulder. Those are my wee tips. Hopefully they help in some way. What we're going to do today is talk about personal mythology and how to create your own little myth based on a story that you've heard from your family or something that's happened to you yourself. And the fancy name for this is autofiction. Very trendy at the minute, so we're right on point. What is autofiction? Autofiction is kind of a blend, you can hear it in the name there, it's a blend between autobiographical writing, that's writing about yourself and your experience, and fiction. I like to think of it as kind of embellishing, taking something that has a kernel of truth in it and adding on layers and making it more interesting. There are some great contemporary autofiction writers that I really love. This chap Ben Lerner, and he's got 3 books out now. He's also a poet, but his autofiction is brilliant, really engaging stories. Also, another fantastic writer, Danny Offel, American writer. The Department of Speculation is a fantastic piece of autofiction, which kind of charts a relationship. It's quite funny as well. There's lots of my copies underlined. And then this dude is probably the most famous autofiction writer at the minute, Norwegian writer Knausgaard, who has chronicled his own life in massive detail. I haven't read it all, but if you want to get into Nicegard, I would recommend the seasonal books. This one's autumn, and they're smaller little snapshots of things related to kind of the ephemera, little details about his life. I think that most writers are all a little bit autofiction. I'll tell you why. I kind of think that we can only write with the building blocks of our own experience. You can only really write what you know. And so there's a little bit of yourself in your own story that comes into everything that you write. But autofiction particularly appeals to me because I guess in my family I've always been known as a bit of an exaggerator, that I can never tell a story straight. I have to embellish it, have to add my own details, have to make it more fun. I'm a little bit like, you know, that uncle that you have who turns up drunk and starts to tell really great stories, but you haven't, not always quite sure how much truth there are in it. That's me. And a lot of my work has little bits of truth and experience and my own lived story in it, as well as the fiction. The great thing about autofiction is it's very, very easy to adapt it into a personal folk tale, so it can easily become a story that's a little bit like a legend that you pass down, like remember the time we did this, or like whenever your dad and I were young we used to do this. Autofiction. So how do you write it? What do you do? First of all, really, really simply, write down what actually happened. Like as if you were going to give a police report. Really boringly. Don't worry about fancy words. Don't worry about embellish it or making it really interesting. Just the bones of the story. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. If you're struggling with that, there are loads and loads of complex story structures you can go to. The hero's journey, which takes you through, I think it's 8 or 9 steps of shaping a story. You can look that up quite easily online. Or there's Cornell's structure, or lots and lots of different things. If you look plot structure up, you'll get endless amounts of things. Very, very complex. I like to shape a story into 3 points, and you can jot these down. They're really interesting or really easy to remember. First of all, something happens. We call that in writer speak the inciting incident. So it just means something happens. There's a change, there's a dilemma, there's a stranger arrives, something different that wasn't there before. So something happens. Second thing, there's an action or reaction to that. So something happens because of the inciting incident. And third, very, very simply, there is a consequence to that. Really, really easy to remember. Something happens, there's an action and a consequence. That is your story. So take what you've written down and make sure it splits into that. Those 3 things really simply. You have got the grounds of the story. I thought I would tell you a story about my granda to help you shape this. My granda passed away a few years ago. Have you ever seen the movie Big Fish? That's pretty much my granda. He was always telling stories. There was probably a tiny little nugget of truth in them, but we were never too sure how much truth there was there. But if it comes down to personal myth, my granda was the man for you. He had a great one. He used to tell us he ran a furniture showroom, and he used to tell us that he had imported a little monkey into the furniture showroom, and if any of the grandchildren could find it anywhere, we could take it home with us, and he would build us a hut and it would be our new pet. And I think I wasted about 5 years of my life looking for that stupid monkey. So that was the level of story my granda worked at. But his favourite one was a story about when he was just beginning to date my nana. And Nana lived in Belfast, but Granda lived up in Ballymena. And this was would have been just before the war. So petrol was quite hard to come by. And he tells the story of how one night he went up to take her out for one of their first dates. And the car got stuck in reverse. And he couldn't get it to move forward. And he didn't know how he was going to get this girl home. And so what did he do? According to Granda, he drove the car all the way from Ballymena to Belfast in reverse to get her home. And she was so enamoured with this, she gave him a next date, and the rest is history. Now, dear only knows how much truth there is actually in that story, but if we break it down into our structure, you can see very, very easily what's our inciting incident. It's the car gets struck in reverse. What's the action that happens because of that? My granda supposedly drives from Ballymena to Belfast in reverse. And finally, what's the consequence? My nana gives him another date. She's so enamoured with this. Very, very simple story structure. When you're coming looking at it to talk about things that might be a wee bit more magical, because I know some of you are very interested in the fantastical and that element of writing mythology, quite often the consequence at the end will feel a little bit more like a kind of moral or a meaning to the story. So, don't trust wolves, or little girls shouldn't go into the forest by themselves, or something like that. And to be honest, the moral of the story with my granda could easily be, my granda was a real charmer. Don't trust him too far. So remember about what we talked about last week. When you are going through those steps, think about who's telling the story and what perspective are we seeing it from. Is it from my granda's perspective, or my nana's perspective, or the perspective of the car, or the moon looking down at them, or whoever? And remember that you need to hold on to the suspension of disbelief. And the suspension of disbelief when you're telling a story is just how much your reader is going along with you, that they haven't started to doubt the truth of what you're telling them. And a wee tip for helping with the suspension of disbelief is to make your story full of detail. The more precise that it is, the more people actually believe you. So give us rounded, full descriptions of the characters. Tell us in detail things like place names and personal names and product names. How often does anybody go into a bar and ask for a beer? You're much more likely to go in and say, can I have a pint of Stella, or a pint of Guinness, or whatever. Be specific in your detail. It actually helps the reader or the listener, whoever is engaging with your story, to believe what you're saying. When you come to write autofiction or myth, like we're talking about like this, that is based on something true, I like to think of the truth element as kind of like a lump of clay. You can model it any way you want. You can add on embellishment, detail, humour, whatever you like, but the clay still has to be there. So the elements that are truthful in your story, what you jotted down at the start, still has to be there, regardless of what you embellish with. When you come to edit your story at the end, make sure that you know what your story is about. So what is the point of your story? Those basic things you jotted down, and that everything that goes into your story adds to that. The number one tip for editing: if you don't know what your story is about, you'll start cutting out all sorts of things that you shouldn't be cutting out, and you'll leave in all sorts of unnecessary detail. If you're struggling, write down in a single sentence what your story is about. This is a story about a man showing off to charm a woman. This is a story about a little girl going into the woods to deliver a present to her grandma. Everything that is in excess of that can be edited out. Everything that adds to that story and the development of the character and the themes needs to stay in. I thought I would finish today by giving you an example of this, a time that I turned one of my own personal mythologies into a piece of written work. This was actually a commission. I work with the songwriter Hannah McPhillamy a lot, and Hannah has responded to my stories in music, and she asked me if I would take one of her songs and turn it into a short story, or take the theme from it and turn it into a short story. It was a song called Ruins, which I realised that Ruins was basically about the things that we build and invest ourselves in that are a waste of time. You put lots of effort into something that at some point in your life you maybe step back from and think, gosh, that wasn't worth the effort, and you've missed out on other things. So I decided to write a short story around this, and I wanted to use personal mythology. I wrote it about a time in my life when I had invested in a career opportunity that really was a bit of a waste of time. Spent about 9 months living in this, oh gosh, awful posh village in Hertfordshire, trying to establish my career. No one was friendly, nobody wanted me to be there, and I came to this moment of realisation that what I had invested in wasn't worth it. And you can see that in this story, and you can see that those 3 points of the point of action, the point of the exciting instant, which is meeting a stranger, the action, which is going home with them, and the consequences, realising that the narrator, me, has invested in the wrong thing. So I'm going to read it. It's about 1,000 words. It takes about 5 minutes to read, and you can be listening out for those things as I read. Ruins. The year I turned 30, I found myself living in a small village on the outskirts of Oxford. As is often the case in England, the name of this village was one place upon another place. Both places passed right through me and didn't stick. The second was a river hardly wide enough to justify its name. During the summer it streamed, then trickled, and by high August had all but disappeared. I could place a bare foot on either side of its parched banks, and kid myself capable of bridging the entire village in one greedy stride. I might have been God. I probably wasn't. No one in the village knew me well enough to be sure. Not even the girl in the corner shop, who every day took my money for bread or biscuits, and on Saturdays sold me cider in a green glass bottle sucked straight from her grandfather's orchard. Red apples, not green, she told me once, accounting for the sweetness and the way the juice clouded in the glass like a late autumn pond. We didn't speak more than was strictly necessary. Money given, money returned, the price of things not specifically priced. She never asked my name or where I'd come from, with my soft, sheepish accent. I was not the interesting kind of lonely. I was the sort that brings a draught in with it. I wanted her to ask me questions. I left spaces between my words like hooks, which never caught on anything. She was much younger than me. I gave myself this as an excuse. I was always making excuses for the village, the way its shoulders rose against me, its straight hedges, and the pond which had not once been paddled or even skimmed with stones. I was afraid the problem lay with me. It didn't. The village contained many houses with actual thatched roofs, which is to say, there was money present. Also ducks, Land Rovers, and men with royal-sounding names. Charles, William, Rupert. I was not drawn to any of them, but once sat next to a young man reading a novel and said, "I am so lonely in this village. Do you want to be my friend?" He looked like his name might be Alexander. I tried not to dwell on this, or the way his cheeks were pink-flushed and modelled, as the cheeks of horse-riding individuals often are. All this took place at the back of a Café Nero, with the sound of hand-dryers like mighty storms rumbling through from the toilets. The young man marked his book with a £5 note and set it on the table. I noticed that it was a Russian book, and knew we were not now or ever going to be close friends. At the time I was not in the market for a lover. "I don't need friends," he said. His voice was a door closing firmly. Nobody actually needs friends. "I do," I said, and pictured myself eating Maltesers late at night by myself on the forecourt of a petrol station. This was a thing that had actually happened and might well occur in the near future. It was not a happy thing to remember. It lacked dialogue. "What do you do when you're lonely?" I asked the young man, anticipating television, pornography, or other thick Russian novels. "I build things out of bricks," he said. "Like Lego?" "No," he said, "much better than Lego. I use real bricks." This was the longest conversation I'd had in months, and while I was sceptical about the bricks and the young man, who had not once lifted his eyes from the tabletop, I agreed to take my cappuccino in a to-go cup and accompany him home. He walked quickly across the village green like there were magnets in him dragging him home. I struggled to keep up. I was wearing impractical shoes and a skirt which could not resist the twitching breeze. "Is this where you live?" I asked the young man, as he led me down a gravel drive and into a long lawned garden. "My parents live there," he said, indicating the large cottage which was now looming behind us. "I built my own house." I looked and saw a pile of bricks arranged to give the illusion of shelter. 4 walls and a kind of sloping roof, leaning as if ready to run away at the slightest hint of weather. It was impossible to tell which end of this house was front and which back. There were no windows, no lights nor chimney, and the door was just a largish gap. "It's lovely," I lied. "Do you sleep in there?" I had fears for the young man's safety. At least I thought there are not earthquakes in this part of the world. He didn't seem to hear me. "Here's my car," he said, indicating a child's crude outline of a motor car made from bricks piled upon bricks. It was parked next to the house and would never move so much as an inch on its bricked-up wheels. "And here's my dog." 4 bricks pulled together to form a rectangle. I could see where he'd used a black felt tip to pen a dog's damp grin on the frontmost brick. "He's a Labrador. They're so friendly and good with children," which made the young man remember his tiny brick children. 5 in total. Catherine, Claire, Sophie, James and William, the eldest, named after a dead uncle. His brick children were perfectly spaced across the lawn, like cutlery laid out for dinner. Each was covered in a clean dishcloth as if dead or sleeping. Each had a mouth, nose, and two black eyes, crudely squalled into a red brick face. All were naked beneath the sheets. "Aren't they lovely?" the young man said, and stooping slowly lifted the nearest to his face, holding it against his cheek and breathing its brick smell in like fresh laundry or bread. "I've always wanted children." I didn't cry then or even later when he told me about his wife who was worn out and sleeping inside their brick house. I knew without asking that she was made of bricks too, and could not bear the thought of talking at her. Instead I said, "Let her rest. She must be exhausted with all these children to look after." I imagined the young man and his wife lying together at night, her brick body holding the heat of his like an old-fashioned hot water bottle. Didn't even cry when he said, "So you don't need anyone but yourself. I'm completely content with everything I've built." No, I didn't cry until I arrived at his gate and looked back to see the young man sitting on his lawn with all those bricks spread around him like the ruins of something already fallen down. I didn't feel sorry for him, only jealous, because he was smiling and I had forgotten how this was done. So you can see there, it's a kind of a strange story, and it does have that kind of fairy tale element to it as well, but it's based on something that really happened to me, and I did actually go up to someone in Cafe Nero and tell him, "Do you want to be my friend?" So that's a little example of how you can take a story that happened to you, get to the kernel of the meaning of it, the essence of what the story is about, and embellish it with details and strange stuff and whatever you fancy. Have fun with it, play with it, see what you can come up with. I really, really hope you enjoy doing this. It's one of the things that gives me most pleasure in life because I feel like I'm getting away with telling lies. Yeah, probably that makes me a bad person, but I love it. Have fun with this. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with, and keep remembering there is no wrong answer when it comes to writing. It's all an experiment to get better. Have fun, and I will talk to you again soon.